the challenges that they face. And we are all called to be one family and to love one another. And that is so difficult for us to do. It has been for me in my life to learn about how to love those who are different from myself, how to understand them, how to be in solidarity with them. And I think that's exactly what the Catholic social teaching is about. It teaches us to live in the world as Catholics and how to live our faith in a world that is so diverse and about which we are often very ignorant. Not because we want to, but because the world's so big and we learn so little about it. And so the Catholic social teaching, one of the principles that we teach is to speak, to reflect, and then to act. Sometimes I add to that we should listen, not just speak, but listen, especially for the men in the room like myself. We're often the first to speak, and it's more difficult for us sometimes to listen because we haven't been taught to do that well. And listening for me has been and still is a challenge. But to be Catholics in this world, we need to listen, to speak with one another, so that we can reflect upon what we hear and what we say, and better understand the reality of other people in the world and how we're connected to that, so that when we act, we act in a way that is informed about those diverse realities and informed by the teaching of Christ and of our church. And our church has been around for so long, throughout so much history, that our teaching it's very rich and very deep, but it's been part of the world, and it's been marked by how people live in the world. So it's been updated and is constantly updated by what we experience in the world. So when hundreds of years ago, when the Catholic Church was so deeply connected to colonialism around the world, every part of the world, there was one sort of reflection that went on, and that became enriched when the European colonizers came into contact, and often in a way that was not very friendly, that was just the opposite of friendly, with peoples around the world. But as those peoples became part of our church, they enriched our learning about how we live in the world. And that goes on today. We're challenged to reflect on the current themes that we see in our world, and to enrich our understanding of how we live our faith in today's world. And so the Catholic social teaching is always being updated. It's really a beautiful thing to go back and look at some of the teachings, the social teachings of our church, both in Scripture, but in the 2,000 years since then. And we can basically trace the history of the world to today. And so that's a little bit what, the teaching is there for us to understand how to fit in the world today. So when we look at Catholic social teachings over so much time, what the church has done, both the bishops, but also lay people like ourselves, upon this reflection, they've come up with 7 themes, which it's not everything of Catholic social teaching, but you see these themes recur throughout the writings of the church and the experience of the church. And so today we're going to look at those 7 themes and reflect on those a little bit based upon how the world we're living in, the world we live in Moreno Valley, in Upland, in Redlands, in Riverside, in Rancho Cucamonga, in Temecula, Corona, in Running Springs, in San Bernardino. These are all, we live our faith in these worlds, embedded in these worlds. And these themes of Catholic social teachings can help us to be better Christians and to live a more rich Catholic experience in that world. So if I can get my thing to work right, I'll. Here we go. So the objectives of this teaching, which I've adapted from materials that are available at the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops at their website. And also many dioceses have worked with these. And this particular slideshow, I started with the subject matter from the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. And I found much of this kind of PowerPoint at the Indianapolis, Indiana diocese, and I've adapted it. But the objectives are become familiar with these 7 themes, to understand the link between these and our everyday lives, and to apply these themes, these concepts in everyday life situations and ask questions and reflect in the light of these themes. So we're going to listen, speak, reflect, and help that to enrich our action in our own parishes, in our own families, in our own everyday life. So what is Catholic social teaching? It's an essential element within the faith, within our Catholic faith. It's fundamental to our commitment to the poor and disenfranchised, the less fortunate, and the vulnerable. As humans, we must respect one another and develop a proper understanding of human life and dignity. So Catholic social teaching emphasizes the need for people to commit themselves to building a fair and just society, and to lead unselfish lives through example. The 7 major themes, and we're going to go over this in great detail, one at a time. Life and dignity of the human person, a call to family, community, and participation, rights and responsibilities, option for the poor and vulnerable, the dignity of work and the rights of workers, solidarity, and the care for God's creation. So we're going to use a worksheet that was created by another diocese to help us guide us. And what I'm going to ask people to do is there will be questions, and I want us to take time individually to answer the questions, to reflect, to think about the questions, and maybe write down your response, and then we'll share that and have a conversation about that, and we'll think about how it could what we're talking about, what we're reflecting on, can help guide our action as Catholics. There's no grading. There's no right or wrong answers. There's just us learning together and sharing how we can better put in practice our faith. So you'll see this slide here repeated throughout this training. And at the top are the 7 themes of Catholic social teaching. And then we'll take time to reflect on each one. And as soon as we get into the first one, we'll take time for you to do some reflecting. I'm not going to be talking all the time about this. So the church, our Catholic Church, proclaims that human life is sacred and that the dignity of the human person is the foundation of a moral vision for society. This is the first, and oftentimes in the Catholic Church, in today's modern Catholic Church, this is often one of the teachings that is most present. For some people, it is the basis of everything, and it gets a lot of attention in our church. It is the foundation of a moral vision for society, the dignity of all life. People don't lose that dignity based on any factor: poverty, age, gender, disability, race, ethnicity, a lack of success, a state of sin. We still are dignified, all of us. This belief is the foundation for all of our principles. And we believe that every person that is precious, that people are more important than things, and that the measure of every institution is whether it threatens or enhances the life and dignity of the human person. So that's the foundation. Now we're going to look at it a little bit more. So I'm asking people, this is a scenario, this is a real scenario. I'm looking through my window right now across the street at my neighbor's house. And this is actually what happened in my neighbor's house. So this scenario is around homelessness. And I know that all of us, because we talked about it in the past, one of the past trainings, and because we live in this region, that we all experience, we've all seen homelessness. And so this question is about, it's a scenario. So one of your neighbors turned their backyard into a shelter for the homeless. Homeless people come and go through your neighborhood in shopping carts with used clothing are left on the sidewalk on your corner. So based on this theme that all people have dignity, that all life is dignified, how would you proceed? And this is the question I want people to take time. These 4 questions, I want you to reflect on them and think by yourself or with your spouse. How would you react? Would you call the police and report them? It's probably some sort of an infraction to shelter, to create a homeless shelter in the middle of a neighborhood. Would you call your priest and ask him, hey, what should I do? Or would you go across the street and call on your neighbor and ask, how can you help? Or like me sometimes, tell your spouse to do something about the problem. So I want to just take a second to check in with people. You're seeing the slide. You understand what I'm asking people to do. I'm asking you, if you have a piece of paper and a pen and you feel that's how you think things through, please take a piece of paper and pen and write a few notes. If not, just think it through And, these may not be the only answers, but take some time. And so I'm going to give us maybe 5 minutes just to think through this. What would you do in that scenario? And before I start the timer, I just want to check in. Can everybody see this? Is it clear what I'm asking people to do?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll start a timer here for 5 minutes, and we'll check back in. Thank you. Okay, the 5 minutes have passed, and I'd like to see if anybody would be willing to share what your personal reflection is. Again, there is no right or wrong answer. I think Catholic social teaching is for us to struggle with our values and to do it both individually and then collectively. So would someone, yeah, Sylvia, would you like to share, please?
Yes, I have I've had that problem with my neighbors next door for 5 years, where they were bringing, and this was before the people started crossing over from the border over here. They would bring, next door neighbors would bring people from South America and keep them in back in these, they just put like, it's not even considered a tent over their roofs, and you could hear them screaming and yelling, and I would call the police, and the police wouldn't do anything because they were too busy with criminals. And I said, well, they're criminals. They make crystal meth, and they're on crystal meth. And they had, at the time, they had marijuana growing in their backyard. Where I live, everybody has like large pieces of property. So they would not help these people. And I felt really bad for the children and the girls, the young girls, that they would bring and over and use them. And in front of my gates, they would have the girls stand in front of my gates with just nothing on top and like a G-string in these stilettos and take pictures. I would go out to the front and get the hose and squirt them. And they would throw things at me and rocks and things like that. And I'd call the police, and the police, by the time the police got here, it was like 2 hours later, they were gone. Nobody in the neighborhood would do anything to protect these people. And I told the people next door, I said, if you're not going to take care of them, at least send them over here. But they wouldn't even send them over here because they're making money off them. And I struggled with the justice and trying to do the right thing for the longest time. And it seemed like I got nowhere with the police because I live in such an isolated area. It takes them a long time to get to where I live and to help these people. But finally, I called Border Patrol and gave them the truck's license because they had a semi truck that would bring in cars and people from South America. And finally, Border Control finally stopped it, where the police and the sheriffs around here couldn't stop it. And I was relieved that these people that they were treating so badly, not giving them water, food, the necessities that they needed to live, where they were just treating them really, really bad. And they would just give them like drugs just to keep them quiet. I didn't think that was right, but I couldn't go next door. And so anyway, the people next door would shoot. They shot my window, like to quiet me. They stole all sorts of things from me. Just, they wanted me to move. And how could I move when they have these people there and you have to disclose it? And they were horrible because when they're on meth, that crystal meth, they're very violent and they're mean. And they would throw like golf balls at me. They've killed my animals. They did all sorts of things. And anyway, I'm still here, and I thank God that after rosaries every day and praying for them every single day, that at least they're not bringing the people over, but they're still making their crystal meth. But the cartel shot their dogs not that long ago, and I had SWAT at my house. So, and I've had the sheriffs come over, they've arrested some of the people, but then new people come in, new from South America and Mexico that are drug dealers. New ones come in, and it's an ongoing thing where I do pray the rosary every single day, and I pray for them every single day. And that's all I can do unless they do something physical, in which they have done before. And I had to call the police, and they arrested them. But they do get very, they've tried to run me off the road. They've done a lot of bad things. In this case, it's more extreme instead of, I mean, to me, if someone was homeless and lived in front of my yard, I wouldn't kick them out. I probably would offer them food or some kind of shelter, but I would not kick them out. I've brought in people that were homeless before into my own home, but they've robbed me, they've stole from me, because they're, a lot of them, the majority of them are mentally ill, and they're doing whatever they can just to survive. And that's my story.
Thank you, Sylvia. That's quite a story. And that you know, as you spoke, I wrote down different issues that you mentioned, because that's what we often find when we encounter what people call, quote unquote, an issue. There's actually a dozen different things going on. You mentioned trafficking. I think, human trafficking, drug use, violence, poverty, immigration, policing, mental health. These are all social issues that are mixed together, or they intersect in this situation of homelessness. And there's obviously, as you experience, there's no simple solution. But there is something that you also mentioned in your response, your faithfulness, compassion, prayer. Those are always components of a response when we see that the life and dignity of people is disrespected, threatened, almost non-existent, where we see people whose dignity has been stripped away from them. So thank you. Does anybody else have a response to that type of a scenario?
Tom, I'm happy to comment about it. Although I have no experience, certainly nothing like Sylvia. When you laid out the scenario and I started thinking about it and taking notes, I didn't imagine anything like Sylvia, what she went through. It was a long progression from where it started out, as in the scenario. A seemingly loving neighbor decided to offer a homeless shelter out of love to people in their backyard. And Sylvia's situation seemed nothing like that. Sylvia's situation seemed like neighbors who were nefarious with their intent, that weren't good neighbors. And there's a need for us to be loving constantly, but it's also not loving to allow people to do terrible things. So, Sylvia, I don't know how long that went on for, and I imagine it went on for a little while before it gradually got worse and worse and worse and worse, and you had to react the way you did. I don't know what I would do if that happened to me, but it would be, I'm sure, pursuit of law. But back to this scenario where it's kind of more pointed at just trying to lovingly support those in need. My notes and reactions were that I would first and foremost talk to my wife about it, and somewhat I would guess prayerfully we would come to some sort of opinion about it. We try to both of us contribute what we think about things, and then move and act. Not move like leave the neighborhood. I mean, behave. And try to be loving and try to be helpful. But, there has to be boundaries. And in Sylvia's situation, the boundaries were long ago crossed. And you could only hope that would never happen, even if in this imagined scene, there were examples of some people who didn't behave well. The people who own the house, who had the shelter, would need to be on their own considerate of that. They couldn't afford to let their place be ruined either. So these are just my thoughts. I know they're not right or they're not wrong. They're just my thoughts. I never imagined in the 5 minutes I had Sylvia's situation. Never crossed my mind. So I don't know what I would do with that situation except pursue legal actions. That's about all I could say about that.
Would anybody else like to reflect on this scenario? Remember, we're going to go through all of these, and there'll be plenty of scenarios to reflect on. But
if you don't mind, Tom, I have a couple of thoughts. There was a time when my first reaction would be just call the authorities, call the cops. God, in his perhaps wisdom and mercy, placed me within the Salvation Army organization. And while I didn't work directly with people in need, I was exposed to it. And from my perspective, homelessness, those who are homeless are victims. And some may disagree with me. I'm well aware that, we encountered people who were addicted to drugs. They had a place to stay if they could be sober, but they couldn't be sober. So they were homeless. There are people who are homeless out of just pure happenstance. Things happen and they never thought they would find themselves living out of a car. And there's mental illness. There are a lot of people on the streets with mental illness. And so the scenario you present is one, well, I guess before I say that is, there are various root causes. We could list them off, including, the trafficking and the pervasiveness of pornography and all kinds of craziness. And so there's lots of things that we as a society have to do on various fronts. How do we effectively help people who are mentally ill? But we're confronted with a situation where there's someone trying to do good in our own neighborhood. And I think that there's a couple things that I definitely would talk with my neighbor. And I think I would definitely try to know who's coming in and out of that yard. When people are personal to us, they're just not dirty creatures that we need to get rid of. They're human beings. And in order for us to appreciate the dignity, we have to know them. When I served Thanksgiving dinner with my son to homeless people, my son was scared. He was right next to me. And as we started walking around the tables and talking to people, their humanity was revealed to him. And before long, he was running around that room like a kid would. And so I think in some respects, I would try to get to know the humanity of the people who are coming in and out, while not putting me or my family at risk.
Thank you, Rich. I saw Paul raise his hand. Did you have something you'd like to share, Paul?
Yes, I would. You know, for all the years that when I worked, I'm retired now. And, you know, situations like this, you know, never really confronted me. And I'm not talking about Sylvia's situation, but the hypothetical that you lay out. And so given it a lot of reflection, a lot of thought, I thought that, you know, based within the confines of your construct and proposed responses, I thought that there are a lot of things that could be done and should be done. One would be that I would, you know, talk to my priest and ask for his ideas and suggestions, because I'm sure that in his experience that he has probably come across this issue, homeless people coming to the parish and asking for assistance, and to see what he would offer. Then I would also, you know, reach out and talk to the neighbor and ask, you know, what the neighbor is doing as far as he or she checked out with the city, the potential violations that they might get into trouble with, which would not be helpful at all. There may be, you know, city or county ordinances that they're not even aware of, and innocently that, you know, that could get them into problems with the city or the county. They could be prosecuted. That would not be a good situation, even though their heart is in the right place. And I think that there are also better ways maybe to assist the homeless. There may be several resources in the community that are available for mental, medical, spiritual, employment, mental health, all of these issues that need to be explored with the homeless that are there, and getting to know them is also a key thing to see what their needs are, and whether or not, you know, what is it that they really need beyond a homeless situation that they find themselves in. So the neighbor may have reached out and try to evaluate these people's circumstances and trying to work with them, but there might be ways to help them out in multiple various ways. So all of the resources that are available should be made available and tapped if necessary. And I'm sure that there are, you know, professionals in the community that would be willing to help out as well, especially if children are involved. Hearts always goes out to children that have to, you know, suffer homelessness, because that's probably one of the most terrible experiences I think that a kid could have, even though they were with their family. That's a positive thing, but living under harsh conditions, especially during the weather, harsh weather conditions, is kind of terrible. So your heart goes out to them. So there are multiple things that could be done and should be explored, and that's my reflection.
Thank you. We'll do one more. Bettina, or two more. Bettina and Dan. I saw Bettina's hand up, virtual hand up.
Hi, everyone again. Yes, well, the first thing I do realistically in the neighborhood where we are at, you know, I'm sure the HOA will handle that right away. And and deal with this. But and our backyards are not really big enough for, you know, to have a shelter or anything. But you know what struck me here is knowing myself more, that I'm growing, because my old me would really be bothered by this. But now something stirred in our inside that leads to compassion. And so what I would do is talk to my husband about it first, and then we will find out more about the intention of the neighbor, you know what, and from there we can help. And I also work help for St. Vincent de Paul, the helpline. And we do have resources, like Paul was saying about tap the resources out there. We do have resources for the homeless. We give them, I believe, 2 to 3 days stay at a motel so they can clean up themselves and rest. And we do have resources. We can refer the, if St. Vincent de Paul is not able to do that, we have a binder that we could look into and find out what other resources. Let's say they're not in Temecula, then they live somewhere else, then we could go through our binder and look for you know, where they can get help. But you know, all like human dignities tells us that all people are precious, so we just can't turn our backs on them. We have to take care of their needs, also being created in the image and likeness of God. So I think that's really important. But I'm glad I'm growing. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Dan?
Yeah, I can think of 4 approaches to this, how to deal with this problem. The choices on your PowerPoint, the one calling on your neighbor and ask how you can help would be a good one. But this would be the #1 approach, which is actually the what we call humanitarian welfare approach. So with this approach deals with the immediate needs of the homeless. So we would like to provide a relief and assistance. It's just like the analogy would be like a lifeguard intervening to save a drowning person. So that would be the #1. The #2 is the community development approach, wherein we look beyond the immediate needs of that person. So when they are hungry, we don't just give them fish. We tell them, we train them on how to fish. So that's the developmental approach. The third one would be the advocacy for them. There are so many laws and institutions that block or that prevents them from realizing what they need. So it's like the lack of housing facilities, high rent, and all that. So that one has to be addressed as well. And the last one would be to do emancipatory work, meaning to empower them, the homeless, by organizing them and organizing the community so that they can work for their interests. They could mobilize themselves as a potent group to influence decision making in our political process. So there's so many approaches, but our step would depend on knowing their needs, or depends also on how our commitment is in helping them. So our spirituality level would be a primary and important factor in going through all these approaches. That's it.
Thank you, Dan. You thought that through really well. I saw Carl raise your hand for a second there, and I see Bob also has a hand up, and Tim as well. You want to start, Carl? I saw your hand up a while ago.
Yeah, I didn't want to stop the process. I know you want to move on to the other thing, but real short.
I
Everybody,
do, but I want to give everybody a chance
Okay.
too.
oh yeah, okay, I'll make it short. I'll just encapsulate what I have going to say. I think this safety should be of a primary concern when you talk about dealing with the homeless, because our family safety, particularly the children, when you have people, anyone that's in a scenario like this, there's things that you're not trained to handle, mental, physical health issues that those individuals have. But you also have to have an awareness of organizations like Mary's Mercy Table, Mary's Village, those organizations that address the problems with the homeless. There's a place for them to go to get their issues addressed. So these programs are comprehensive programs, so they're meant to address those kind of things. And when we say the police have specialized units or people in the police department that addresses homeless. So to say just to call the police are dealing with other civic issues, not homelessness. That's for another segment inside the police department in itself. So again, I'll go back to, we must keep in mind, so if it was me, I'll go have a conversation with this neighbor, inform them of organizations that does this. Perhaps you go pony up with those organizations, move your efforts in that direction and out of the neighborhood, because the residential areas is exactly what it's meant for, residential, not for setting up shop for those kind of organizations, what these people did, and certainly what Sylvia experienced. That is not the scenario for that. So again, if we just follow the process and people understand the process, and like one of my brothers said, the county, the city, take it to your council persons. Those are the issues you want to bear down on them when we're not getting that cooperation we think we should, because again, safety is paramount, because these homeless people have a lot of issues. I deal with it every day at work, and I see it from A to Z. And so we need to be aware of that when we're talking about addressing homeless persons in our residential areas.
Thank you. Bob?
Looking at all the choices that's presented in the situation, I probably would pick all four of them, because all four of them reflects certain parts of me that tries to look at the homeless individual from more of a social perspective. A and B, the cops and the priest, probably will be able to give me a bigger picture of how this particular issue, this local issue, might have some consequences for the larger neighborhood. I would also call my neighbor and ask how I can help, or more importantly, maybe be given the opportunity to actually talk to the homeless person. They're not just an abstract concept, but they are real people, and probably get to know a little bit more about the causes of their homelessness. Because what we see might be the issue of homelessness, but it might be a deeper issue of hopelessness that can be addressed by other members of the community. And of course, let my spouse not necessarily do something alone, but get the cooperation of my spouse to address the problem. So I see this problem of hopelessness also as an opportunity for the community to come together. And if with that kind of perspective, I guess this is, to a certain extent, this can be an opportunity for evangelization. So I'm looking at that, but I'll always be conflicted at those moments where, should I call the cops, or should I be neighborly, call the priest, or just not even think of it as a problem or ignore the problem?
Thank you, Bob. The church teaches us a principle. It's a big word, subsidiarity. what it means is when addressing issues, start at the most simple and the closest to you, and then work outward from there. And that's I think very much what Dan talked about. There's stages that you can do this in. When I faced this issue, it bothered me. There were people outside my window every night fighting and keeping me awake. And I thought about the safety of my family. And I was kind of afraid to approach my neighbor. I didn't want to sound like some sort of a jerk that, was not understanding. But I also have done a lot of work with the homeless, and I wasn't afraid to speak with the homeless people. I've done that for many, many years, and I found out much of what Sylvia mentioned and others. There were a multitude of problems that were going on. And then when I did speak with my neighbor, I found, they were trying to help. There were tent cities, there were tents up all over the neighborhood. And there still are, and this was quite a few years ago. There's still tents up all over. This neighbor opened up the back gate and people had their tents in there, and the neighbor's intention was to make it more safe than it is pitching your tent out there in my neighborhood, which is not always a very safe place. The neighbor had good intentions. I did speak with the police. I didn't call them up and ask them to come over and arrest people. But, through my work, I speak with police quite frequently. And as Carl said, I'm very much aware that there's officers that deal with issues around homeless all the time. They weren't going to come over and run off the homeless people. They also were going to interview them and see, what was needed. I spoke with my priests and other religious leaders that I know in the city of San Bernardino who work with homeless. And we did work through a process of, this. It started with the personal, reflecting with myself and my wife about our family's safety and our fears and our concerns also for the homeless families. And we moved to community, a level of speaking with churches that have experience working with the homeless and institutions. Could they come over and help? Is there services they could provide? We did advocacy that at the time in the city of San Bernardino, the Catholic church was working to open up a shelter for men, and the city of San Bernardino was resisting it. They thought that a shelter would bring in more homelessness. And we organized priests and clergy, and we went to City Hall and we advocated that they support that. And it worked. They have opened up a new shelter for men in the city, but that still didn't solve all the problem. There's still so much homeless around the city. Eventually the neighbor moved and that backyard was closed off, but there's still homeless folks living across the street in a car on a neighbor's property. They have the right to do that. And the problem didn't go away. And what we needed was more of an institutional response to provide wraparound services to people. But that's a very complex issue. And it hasn't been resolved because we don't have the resources in our city to resolve it all. but there are things, positive things that are happening to address it. And I think, I learned through the process, and I reaffirmed the dignity that I believe that all people have, and didn't approach it, from a perspective of that they were less than, or that they needed to be incarcerated or something. Some of those families I know now are going to St. John's Episcopal Church for food, because I go there and do service. And I know some of them have found permanent housing, but the issue continues. In the state of California, there's, according to statistics, there's almost 200,000 homeless. And most of the professionals that work in that say that undercount is probably twice as many. So I think the thing that, we have to be reminded of is that all people have an inherent dignity, and that when we try to approach this or other problems where we see that people's dignity is being taken away, we have to start at the most simple personal level and go from there to try to reach institutional changes that will address those root causes that people know. So that's where, I landed with that. I still get woken up at night by homeless, but I choose to live in San Bernardino. It's part of my ministry. I choose to live in my neighborhood. I'm only a block away from St. Bernardine's Hospital, and there's always people getting dropped off here, and they come into the neighborhood, and that's my neighborhood. And my children have been raised with that, and they understand in a way that I didn't when I was a child, that the homeless live among us, and that we're all God's children. And Anthony, I'll turn it over to you.
No, I was just going to wait till you finish, Tom. First, I kind of echo what I think everyone else is saying with Sylvia. Thank God you're still okay, that you're doing well. Our prayers, my prayers, and all of our prayers are with you, that you stay safe and be safe. That's the number one thing, is to ensure that for yourself. We have a family member who is homeless. So this issue, certainly is familiar to us, and it's a complicated issue. It's not an easy one. And, and I kind of go and build upon what all of my colleagues are saying here in terms of, and what you are saying as well, in regards to the homeless. Our relative has a choice and has been reached out to, and we're here to help him, but he decides to be homeless, and he decides that he can't get over his own anger, his own ego, to seek help, or maybe he doesn't he doesn't realize he needs it. Not sure exactly, but there's addiction issues as well, and that's a big problem. Obviously, a lot of them have addiction issues. I also must say that some of the most profound and wonderful conversations I have ever experienced are with homeless people as well. So, but I think the problem is this is such a large problem that requires a thoughtful and integrated approach from the very top, and a serious approach from our government. And it's not being done at that level. It has to be looked at and dealt with. And I think people just have thrown up their hands to say, well, what are we going to do about it? You know, we talk about neighborhoods and we say, well, not in our backyard. And you kind of pass the baton to someone else and you push the issue to someone else or some other place. And I think it needs to be dealt with at the very highest levels of our government. But it has to be taken seriously and dealt with compassion and with thought. And until we have that, at least here in the United States, I can't speak about other countries. Obviously, homelessness has been around since the beginning of time, and it's a problem throughout the world. But in terms of our country, this has to be something that's taken seriously. And until that happens, at a higher, like you said, Tom, at an institutional level, we're going to continue to have these problems. There always will be homeless people, unfortunately, but there are different ways that can be dealt with and handled in a humane way, but also in a thoughtful way. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim.
Yeah, Tom. Well, I didn't want to chime in at the beginning because I wanted to kind of like listen to what everybody had to say, or just about everybody. But it goes back, like Tom, like you were saying, it goes back in time. I remember when Pico and all that sent me to Washington, D.C., you know, to talk to the to talk to the Geiner up there and all that regarding the housing crisis. With all this homeless stuff has started even before then, but the attitudes of the ones that are sitting in DC, even then, what they have other things that they want to attend to. And for hearing one politician, or not one politician, but I don't know what Geiner is, I guess somewhat of a politician, but you know, he made the statement is that, well, I guess I will never be there. So when you have this attitude still today in DC, this is what's going to happen. Josie and I, we spent time with the homeless. They're not bad people. Yes, they do have their issues and all that. And Sylvia, I have to. I think I understand kind of like where you're coming from to a point. And although I've never been there, I've only experienced it. Josie and I only experienced it on the streets and serving in soup kitchens for a long time. But it's going to take time for things to happen. The process is slow. You can start simple, the next step, next step, next step. But the process seems like it never gets answered because the politicians rather spend their money, I feel, elsewhere than where they should. And I mean, just look at the border now. How many people are coming across the border now? Who, you know, you got the cartel shooting at the border patrol. You got kids that are just dropped off, sent over to cross the border, thinking that the leverage will be gained through that. And they're coming over with COVID. You know, I look at it as if we were parents and we did that to our kids, we would be sitting in prison today. And I just, so the buck has to really, really, really stop. And we need to have some kind of control over how we're going to we're not going to fully stop it, but at least ease it up to where we can start taking care of things that we should be taking care of instead of, you know, other things with the monies. I mean, it's sitting right in our face. And yes, Tom, I have to agree with you that it's probably well over 200,000 homeless or more, whatever. I don't know quite what you said, but yes, it's always been a crisis. It will always be. But the government has to also step in and help, because you can call the cops, you can, some priests don't even want to deal with it. I've come in contact with that. And they says, that's not my thing. That's for this thing down the street or whatever. And I'm not trying to bash the priests, but, of course they're busy and other things too, but I think that's where it stops or starts, like you were saying, but something has to ease up before we can actually hopefully gain some kind of a control over it. But Josie and I would probably go talk to the neighbor and see how we can help, and if there's still subsidiaries per se available, we would lead them to that, or ask them if we can, ask them to come over and talk with you or talk to them, so that they don't feel like you're being a tattletale or something. The police, yes, won't get too much involved in it. But at the same time, there has to be, some form of, I think, order in order to keep things from continuing to happen. So.
Thank you, Tim. I want to be, we're going to have to be more cautious about our time. We spent an hour on this, and it's a great hour because we're digging into our own thinking about how we live through the social teachings of our church. And I just want to end by, that we often are reminded of the centrality of the dignity of life in the Catholic Church. And what we've been talking about now is a very important part of that. So I'd like to move on to the next slide, and just take a look at this, and then we'll find a way to be a little bit more brief as we work through this. So the second basic tenet of Catholic social teaching is a call to family, community, and participation. The person is not only sacred, but also social. So how we shape our society through the different institutions directly affects human dignity and the capacity of individuals to grow in community. Marriage and the family are the central social institutions that must be supported and strengthened. And we believe people have a right and a duty to actively participate in society, seeking together the common good and well-being of all, especially the poor and the vulnerable. So you can see how this is connected to the first theme, but it takes it a step further. It's not just the individual person, but the call to family, community, and participation. So this scenario here is one I'd like us to reflect on a little bit, and it is happening here. So the scenario is a Puerto Rican family. It could be an Afghan family whose home had been destroyed in this by a hurricane, comes to you with the hope of finding a place to live. They've been searching for housing for a long time, but to no avail. Although you're very busy, you recognize that this family is in desperate need of assistance. Based on this theme of family, community, and participation, what would you do? And some of the possible responses: give them the phone number of Catholic Charities, give them a few names and phone numbers of local apartments to rent, invite them into your home and put aside some time to explore safe, clean, and affordable housing for the family. And tell them you're sorry, but you just don't know how to help. Give them money and tell them you'll pray for them. So again, I want us to spend this time just take, I'll set a timer. Let's just take 2 minutes and reflect on this personally. In this situation, how would you respond? Okay, so I invite people to share a little bit about your thinking about this, and I ask us to remember the response is related to the how we shape our society and the kind of centrality of marriage and the family. So as we respond to this, how do we respond in a way where we think about how our society, our economics, our politics, et cetera, affect the dignity of this particular Puerto Rican family, or of another example of a family arriving from Haiti or from Guatemala, and how do we support them as a family and invite them in to participate within our own society. Would anybody like to share what you have thought about this? And this time, for the sake of getting through this, we'll take no more than 4, so that, and everybody gets a chance on the rest of the slides as well. Anthony?
Yes, really quick. I know. I think, well, I know the diocese has when these types of things happen, start getting some plans and in the works in terms of how they want it approached. I would definitely approach the diocese and maybe Catholic Charity first and see how it's being handled. If opening the home up is an option and the family is vetted a little bit, then I don't think it would be a problem for us or for me to open my home up or have that as an option until something else is found in a more permanent way. But I think that would be the to take an active part in it, just like the problem before. You want to be, I think, proactive and be a part of the solution in what way you can be a help. So that's what I would do.
Thanks, Anthony. Anyone else?
Tom? Fernando and Son. Yeah, we kind of share the same thoughts with Anthony. We would definitely invite them into our home. We're empty nesters, so we have space. But at the same time, reaching out to various resources, Catholic Charities or other friends, or if they are in need of cash or money and for their own needs, then we would offer that. But security definitely is an issue. But if they're reaching out to you and you know them, that hopefully that's kind of would be okay. But that would be our approach as for this type of thing.
Thank you. I think I saw Gilberto.
Yeah, Tom, and it's important that as we do ministry in our communities that we understand what services are available. In Redlands, Holy Name of Jesus does a homeless shower program, and we provide a meal for the homeless. But you have to know what agencies are referring or having services for particular scenarios. So in Redlands, the Family Service Association, who is a big fundraiser and supported well in the community, and we support them, and I have supported them personally, they deal specifically with families. They deal specifically with homeless families. So as you're in the community and you're working your ministry, you need to understand what our resources are for homeless families, for single men, for single women, for addicted folks, for folks who's mentally ill, and then have a resource to be able to refer them to. I would, in this scenario, specifically call the director and say, hey, this is what's going on, this is what we have, can you help them? How do we get them there? How do we get their help? So knowing what is available is important.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, Tom, I'm gonna agree with what Gilberto said and Fernando and Tony said to a point, but it stems back to what are the resources that are there open. Catholic Charities would be the #1 option. A shelter, which usually they have in place, like the Red Cross or whatever, I would give that. But I would be careful only for the security of our own family. If the family is presentable enough, yes, we would probably open up our doors. But if not, at least probably if we had the cash or the money to probably lay them up into maybe a hotel or something like that for a couple of days or so until they got the connections with Catholic Charities. But I think there has to be some stable grounds with it. When you send somebody someplace and they say that they're doing it or that they will take it, they can't be saying, well, we can't take you because of this or because of that. So there has to be some concrete.
Thank you. One final comment. Dan?
Yeah. Yeah. I think we should look at that scenario. We need to find out why they could not find a housing for a long time. And from their answer, we can proceed from there. But definitely, in times of calamities like what happened in Puerto Rico, there are government, federal, private, and church institutions that are actively helping out the community, providing them housing on a temporary basis. And there are so many ways by which we can help them. But definitely, if if we have resolved or find out the reason why they could not find any housing, it could be because they don't have money, or because they don't know where to look for help. So I think information, gathering information first would be essential in devising some strategies and plans to help them.
Thank you. I had several experiences like this. My stepdad ran an orphanage and was very involved. When I was in college, he and my mom, but most of the kids were gone. They brought in a family from Guatemala to live with them. And I really learned a lot from how that worked. They invited the family to become part of our parish and went with them to church and introduced them to their friends and to the church. And it was really incredible how our parish community supported this family. The husband was a shoemaker, and he found work through people from the church a man who owned a shoe store, and he gave them work. It seemed like families almost were fighting over who could be more supportive. They really were invited into the community, and they looked at their family as part of our families. I really see this where they say marriage and a family are the central social institutions that must be supported and strengthened. By inviting this family into our parish, many families benefited from understanding how they were moving through this crisis. They had escaped Guatemala like so many thousands and thousands of families. This was back in the 80s, who were fleeing from repression. And we started to learn, there were sisters, a group of nuns in the city who were very active around human rights in Guatemala. They started to come and give presentations at the church. And we learned as a community about what was happening and how we could be supportive. And other families were invited from Guatemala. And actually, there was a parish in our city that started to become a hub, because we were in a very segregated white area of Iowa. But more Guatemalan families started to arrive, and they were welcome at that church and in the schools. They faced issues, but as a community, we came together, and we learned also a little bit about the role that our government was playing. And there was advocacy that took place in our community to support policies that defended human rights in Guatemala. So just that act of bringing in a family and recognizing them really, I think, strengthened many of our families' faith and our wellness as a church. Okay, are we still good? Does anybody need a break here can we move on to the next one? Okay. So this, I think as you can see, we're kind of moving up a hierarchy of needs, from the individual to the more social. slide talks about the rights and responsibilities. So our Catholic social teaching throughout many, many years, there's been writings by the Pope and by ecumenical councils, and we can go, certainly back to the scriptures and the actions of Christ and find a recognition for this. But we teach that human dignity can be protected and a healthy community can be achieved only if human rights are protected and the basic responsibilities are met. So human rights is not some kind of a add-on or some modern radical thing that the church talks about. It's not a leftist or a right type of issue. This is integral to our understanding of human dignity, that all people have rights. And specifically over the years, through when you read some of the encyclicals and writings, you'll see that the Catholic Church, especially our church in the United States, has spent a lot of time talking about the right to life, which is definitely the unborn, but also much, much more than that. The right to life, including food and shelter, economic rights, including education and employment, including the right to unionize workers, and political and cultural rights, including religious freedom, not just for Christians, but for all, people of all religions, so that they have a right to exercise that. But also, there's been a lot of reflection and writing among our church leaders about the fact that with rights come responsibilities to others, to our families. Again, we go back to the family and to the common good of all. And, I know you're spending, I understand you're spending more time looking at some of the readings of the church. These are definitely, very much included. And you can kind of trace some of the history of the Catholic Church in the US through these Catholic social teachings. A lot of the rights and responsibilities and writing about rights and responsibilities came out. It had a great emphasis when workers in the United States began to organize. Immigrant families who arrived were organizing trade unions during the civil rights movement, not just the part we know of in the 50s and 60s, but the civil rights movement throughout history in the United States. There has been reflection in the Catholic Church and in others about rights and responsibilities. And so you can kind of trace the progression of the Catholic Church and also some of our weaknesses of the Catholic Church, where these things have not been reflected on at all points in history, and where they become more prevalent over the last few years. We've seen both the Pope and our bishops in the United States reflect upon the rights of Black families, Black individuals in the United States as the result of issues that have been going on, where racism has reared its head again, and racist expressions, attacks, burning synagogues and mosques and churches have risen again and become more apparent to people. And there's been a lot of teaching about rights. And so, there's many ways we could, scenarios where we could talk about this. For now, I want to try and keep it close to where we are. So this scenario is while you're volunteering at Mary's Mercy Center, you notice an impoverished man praying before eating his meal. Though he's sitting alone and speaking quietly, you're able to discern that he's praying to a non-Christian God. A fellow volunteer who happens to be a devout Catholic becomes noticeably concerned and asks if the man should be confronted. So please look at these responses and think what you might think would be appropriate. Telling the volunteer that the man may be able to stay depending on his religious beliefs. Remind the volunteer that the man has a right to express his religious beliefs, regardless of what they may be. Or assuring the volunteer that the man will be asked to leave after he finishes eating. Again, let's just take 2 minutes. I think this one isn't that hard to figure out. So let's just take a minute or two and think about some of your experiences, not just related to this scenario, but this type of scenario, how we treat people's religious rights in the United States, how we treat the other who is not like us in a country that claims to be Christian, and what those rights are and your experiences with those. So let's just take 2 minutes and spend some time reflecting, jogging down notes, talking with your spouse, and we'll come back and share. Thank you. Okay, this may be oversimplistic. It is very simple, I think. But feel free to share other expressions where you're informed by your Catholic faith and by Catholic social teaching to support the rights of people unlike ourselves.
Yeah, Tom, just now we would end up going with number B. Not that you have to be involved in it or accept their ways, but at least give them the right to pray God, to their God or whatever God it may be. Give them the right to express their religious freedom. And Josie and I, we learn a lot when we visit the mosque in Riverside, and we have a Sikh community up the street that we got involved with. And yes, they have their ways of praying, but you know, that's the right. They were always hospitable to us, and we should all have a right to express our religious freedom as long as it doesn't turn into violence.
Thank you. Anyone else? Paul?
Yeah, I think that this all comes down to one very important principle, not just of Catholic social teaching, but of what Jesus has taught us. That is love of neighbor. The love of neighbor means regardless of, whether they're rich or whether they're poor, whether they're Hindu or whether they're a fellow Catholic, you are to love your neighbor. And it comes down to that. And what flows from that is that, everyone should have the freedom to express themselves as well as to exercise their religious belief, especially in our country, in our nation. Not every country offers that or provides for that type of religious freedom. We're fortunate to have that. And that's all.
Can anybody think of other rights that are being challenged today, that we see challenged in the modern world we live in our country or in your own community, that we as Catholics, guided by this social teaching, should help stand up for? Carl, do you want to share? You're on mute.
No, you had muted yourself. We couldn't hear you.
Yeah, I just asked if people want to share about another right that is being challenged today, that we see challenged in our contemporary world, that we as Catholics, guided by this social teaching, should be defending. Anthony?
Well, I think one basic right is the right of free speech. That's being challenged in different ways.
I also have one, but it might be controversial. Parenting. We come from different cultures in America, and there are certain cultures that have a certain way of parenting that may be in conflict or might be an issue with some other cultures in the larger society. So it's like, where do you draw the line? On the one hand, you respect their particular culture, but on the other hand, respecting that particular way of parenting might, like in this particular example, might be offensive to some other people who may not agree with the way parenting has been handled.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
Also the aspect of gender, which in the sense that sometimes the male gender aspect is being looked in a different form than the female aspect, which in certain culture too, they treat the male is more of like the head of the family, but in our culture here in the United States is kind of the opposite way, in the sense that they treat the male more kind of like inferior, more than a female gender, and which I think is another aspect that I think we have to look at it in that sense, that sometimes we all are equal. It doesn't matter the gender or any background.
Thank you. Bob had said that the issue of parenting may be controversial. This issue of controversy within the Catholic Church is not something that we should run away from, but that we should embrace. The life of Christ was very controversial, and the teaching of Christ was very controversial at the time. And when we deal with these issues of rights, they're often controversial. And we need to guide ourselves by speaking with others, listening to others, reflecting, and working through action. There's rights that are being addressed every day. And we need to be guided by our Catholic social teaching. There's the right to have a nationality, the right to a homeland. There's the right to vote. There's LGBTQ rights right now are being, it's a very controversial issue for some people that our Pope has spoken out on, the church is speaking on. The right to life is battled daily in our communities. And there's racial justice, the right of all people to be respected and to have the same respect from institutions, not just individuals, our educational institutions. Are they educating immigrant families, Black families, the same? If so, why do we see such big differences that are occurring, et cetera? So I bring up controversy, that I ask you to not be afraid to bring it up. And I'm expecting Dan's going to do that for us. You're on mute, Dan.
I'm just trying to salute you for mentioning racial injustice. Racial hatred is very common nowadays in our society, and I think that should be addressed, because that is a form of a violation of human integrity or human decency. So I think that's one topic I'm very sensitive to, and thank you for addressing that one.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, Rich?
Well, I just wanted to also address Bob's comment. Seemed to have been more about parental discipline, but there are issues about the education of our children and other. And you mentioned institutional rights, and I have often thought that it is just crazy that I would have to go into the medical office at my daughter's high school so that we could give her a Tylenol but that somehow my daughter could procure an abortion without my knowing about it. And so those are things that we still need to discuss. And where do parents really have the rights over the education and formation of their family and their family values?
Thank you. Anyone else? Bettina, you look pensive there. I bet you have an opinion.
Well, Professor, I'm thinking of, I'm more on the education and formation too. What I'm thinking is, let's say in public schools, is it possible to incorporate teachings about God? Or that's probably controversial because of the different nationalities. But I'm seeing at the basis of all of these problems are because of we lack the conversion. You know, we have to have the conversion of hearts. Otherwise, because God is the source of true good. And that's the problem with this world. You know, we lack that goodness. So if we are grafted in Jesus Christ, which is the true vine, then all the nourishment that we need will just come from him, and there would be peace. I mean, you know, if we're talking about world peace, if it's even possible, but all of this crisis and problems stem from having a bad heart. And if we just cure, we can just go to the source and cure it, then we probably won't have this problem as much. But that's a big dream. So that's what I'm thinking.
Thank you. One of the parts of this teaching of our church that often is not given as much attention is that it's not just rights, it's rights and responsibilities. And with rights come responsibilities. One of our, I think, as leaders within our parishes and within our church and our community, one of our responsibilities is to educate ourselves more about these rights. One place that is very good for me to do this is with the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. They publish many documents, both current contemporary documents and historical documents that reflect about this, that help me as a person who's trying to become a better Christian and a better Catholic, to deepen my understanding of what those rights are, because many of us, myself certainly included, often live within a narrow realm of experience. And I'm unaware of how other people experience life and how their rights have been historically denied them, and how institutions can systematically work to deny people's rights. And so I'm challenged as a Catholic to fill that responsibility. If I know that as a church we're taught to love one another, and that love is the love your neighbor as yourself is a central teaching of Christ, then I have a responsibility to learn about my neighbor and about those that I'm in relationship with. And oftentimes those relationships are hidden to me. I didn't know that I that, as a child, that my government had institutionalized lack of rights for workers, for racial minorities, I didn't know that. And my teachers and schooling didn't always teach me that. So as I learned about my own rights and rights of others, I also have to learn about my responsibility to continue learning and to continue to challenge myself and those around me to learn more so that we can respect those rights. As children, I know none of us really knew about the rights of the unborn. It takes a while as we mature to learn about those. And we're called to learn about those rights as well as many others. The beauty of our church is that there's such diversity in the Catholic Church. There's an African church, there's an Asian church, there's Latin American church. So I've been blessed, and I've challenged myself to reach out to others and learn their perspectives so that when I think about my own rights, I also understand how they are related to others. And I think that's a really important responsibility, but it's also a gift of our church. We can go out and learn from others, from people in our own country that have rights that aren't respected, and people around the world that are part of our church or of other churches, and what they are. And that's a beautiful part, I think, of our church. We always have that opportunity to learn more and deepen our faith and our understanding. And the resources are there. If you need more, there's people within our diocese, many of our priests and our parishioners, our fellow parishioners. Just look at the photos of all of us here today, and you can see the diversity of life experience and of knowledge that can teach us more about other people's rights. And so we're obligated. We have a responsibility to get to know our neighbor and ask them. Anyone else?
Yeah, I have. Here's a controversial issue, I'm sure, even among us here, and that is the right of a human person to find work, to find shelter, to find those basic things, regardless of boundaries, international boundaries. I think that the love of neighbor is extended to our fellow man. And, I heard one of the comments from one of our brothers earlier about immigrants at the border and the unfettered access, so to speak, of people coming across the border and bringing COVID and whatever, crime, whatever. The truth of the matter is that the majority of people that are crossing the border are crossing because they are hungry. They are looking for a better life for themselves and their families. They're fleeing from persecution. They're fleeing from crime that is unfathomable in our country, even though we have crime, but it's even worse in other countries, especially in Central America. And those people, one time we did recognize that they had rights in this country. And just recently, we have basically turned a blind eye from so many immigrants, including the ones from Haitian or Haiti. We see that, we've welcomed, of course, our arms and embraced the Afghanistans who were fleeing their country from persecution for good reason. But there are so many people that are being persecuted in other nations, and we turn a blind eye to those.
Thank you, Paul. That's a perfect segue to our next, the example that I use is of Haiti. And so let's move on to this. And then after this, maybe we can take a little break. So the next teaching is the option for the poor and vulnerable. And it tells us that while the common good embraces all, there are those who are weak, vulnerable, and most in need who deserve preferential concern. This preferential option for the poor and vulnerable includes all who are marginalized in our nation and beyond. The unborn, person with disabilities, the elderly, terminally ill, and victims of injustice and oppression. This definitely has roots all the way back to Christ's teachings. They're a central part of his teaching. And the writings that you can find in the Catholic Church about this are also very challenging and enriching for us to learn from. Let's see, I'll move on to the next. So here's our example. Thousands of Haitian refugees amass at the US-Mexican border. They are obviously fleeing poverty, and many could potentially have COVID-19. Many call to deport them to Haiti. What should we do as local Catholics? The scenarios that I put out are, this is a national issue. We should let the feds work it out. B, watch the football game and mind your own business. There is a football game going on right now, and I notice none of you are watching it. So I appreciate that for now. C, plan a prayer vigil at your local congressperson's office and call on our government to stop the deportations and find ways to provide asylum. And D, call the bishop's office and ask what they are doing. So I want to check in with you and be respectful. Does anybody need a couple minutes here for a break or? No? Yes, Sylvia?
Tom, just what's the plan?
I need a break.
Are we going to break for lunch, or are we just going to kind of?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I think we should decide that. You should decide that collectively. So Jose Luis told me we can go until 2. I don't think we necessarily need to do that because I want to be respectful of your time with your family as well. But
I think if you have time, Tom, they can have a break of at least 30 minutes for lunch, and then you use the time you have for finalizing the presentation. If you have time, Tom. If not, we can take
I have,
a break.
yes, I have all the time in the world, and I appreciate you letting me spend it with you. But I know you also have family to return to. So
yeah,
let's see if there's a consensus. Do we need a half hour to get something to eat? Can we be a little bit shorter, or is that, do you need to sit down with your family and feed people, or?
Yeah.
Should we take a half hour?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's fine.
Okay, so it's 11:54. We'll be back in 30 minutes at 12:24. 12:24. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your patience. Enjoy your lunch.
What happened this time? You know, where was the response this time? Because there may have not been a flex like we seen if maybe there was a better response, not just from America, but from the surrounding countries as well, to help them temporarily until we can all the world can get them back on their feet again, per se. That's kind of like where, you know, where I'm at. I mean, I'm not saying that they shouldn't be not coming here. It's just that that's what happened there. But then what do we do if they are here? Do we send them back? Or, you know, that can be that for me, that's more of a national level issue. I mean, yes, the church can only do so much. That's where we stand on that. But at the same time, it's like, how do we get these politicians again, you know, saying, hey, look, what can we do? What failed and what can we do better?
Just quickly, I'll turn it over to other folks, but the context is most of these Haitian immigrants, they're not coming from Haiti. They left over 2 years ago and they were living in Brazil, in Chile, and other countries. That's one part of the context. The other difference is when a couple years ago, we weren't in COVID. And that has changed a lot, the context where people feel fearful of the other who they may not be vaccinated, et cetera. And then another part that's changed in the context is there's been a change in our national government, and there's just but there's continued deep controversy and in many sectors hatred for people who are coming from other countries at the border. Added to that, there's a racial aspect that's different because Haitians are Black and other immigrants are not. And oftentimes we've treated historically Black immigrants very differently than we have others. So that's the context. I'm not going to say what the answer is. I'll turn that over to Bob. He has his hand up for a while.
Well, thank you. Given the scenario here, first of all, I guess as local Catholics, well, we need to at least be knowledgeable on how our government works. You know, there's a range of issues that, you know, that come to our community. Some issues are dealt much better on the national level, all the way down to the local level. So since this is a border dispute, the agency that handles the border disputes are federal agencies. So if we want to stop this kind of issue, or we want to clarify how this issue is going to be resolved, you know, I would call first federal authorities. That would mean maybe giving a call to our president or giving a call to our congressional officials, be they a U.S. senator or a House of Representatives. I'll start from there because they would probably be in a better position to find a resolution, maybe temporary at first, but a resolution to address this problem. You know, I wouldn't call my local mayor to address this. So that is where I would start out first, and maybe do the option C also.
Thank you. Anyone else? Sylvia?
Yes, my grandmother did this a long, long time ago. Well, she had a large piece of property. And when they were moving the homes from the two that were on the path of the 210 freeway, they used to give them away free. And so she would go over there and have them move them onto her lot. And people that were coming over at the time, it wasn't just Hispanics, it was like there were some Indians that didn't have home, American Indians that didn't have a home, and I don't know, other nationalities. Well, anyway, she fixed the houses and put them in the houses and made like a community garden there for them, but she also made food for them while they were going looking for work. But she said the condition that they got to stay there and live was that they had to go with her to mass every Sunday. And that was the condition. And she took them to mass, but she also educated them too and helped them get jobs. She had a real old car. I mean, this is a long time ago, a really old car. And she would make trips taking them to the church, and she would have the priest talk to them. She did a lot of the things that we're called to do, like one-on-one with these people, to assure them and help them and guide them, because a lot of them don't have courage to go out and do some of the things they're supposed to do. When she would teach them our etiquette, our ways, and how you're supposed to keep your house and your yard, things like that, that nobody taught people at that time. And I think we need to go back to that, bring in one person at a time to give them that quality education, and to teach them our ways and teach them things about the government, where they can go, what they can do, teach them how to do things. One of the things she did was she used to can, and she taught them how to can. They didn't know how to cook well, she taught them how to cook. There was a lot of things that she taught them how to do, so that when they were ready to move out, they on their own, they could feel good about being American citizen. Because one thing she did, she took them to so that they had to become American citizens. That was the other condition. There was like 3 conditions, and I only remember the 2. But anyway, I think we need to come back to things like that.
Thank you, Sylvia. Anyone else? I agree. These are people who are at the border. They're not coming into our communities. They're being held at the border, and a great majority have already been deported to Haiti under deplorable conditions. The president of the country had recently been assassinated. There is a great deal of violence in the streets. There was both an earthquake and a hurricane. The government of Haiti does not have the capacity to receive these people and treat them as refugees. And they've been gone from their country for more than 2 years. Many of their families are still dispersed around the world. And so it is in some ways a national issue and an international issue, but there are things we can do. And, one of them isn't just to turn it off and pretend like it's not happening. Sometimes things seem overwhelming There's so much going on in the world, and we're suffering from anxiety already from all of the overload of COVID and issues that we're dealing with our families. But this is an evident issue of an option for the poor and vulnerable. And so there's things that we can do. We can call the bishop's office. Often it's a good idea to call the diocese, which is, connected to the Catholic Conference of Bishops and to the U.S. Conference of Bishops. They're hearing more. They understand what Catholic Charities is doing. And we can call for information and ask what's going on. We can reach out. We did this in San Bernardino. We held a prayer vigil. There's a group that was founded and is still very much supported by our Catholic diocese. It's called the Inland Coalition for Immigrant Justice, that the diocese is very involved with. When I heard this, I called them, and I called some of our priests that I know are very active around immigrant issues. I asked, because I learned there was a national day of protest. It was a week ago Friday. And so we organized, not so much a protest because, more of a rally to gain attention of the media to this issue. But we did it in front of our congressperson, his office in San Bernardino, Pete Aguilar. And we called his office and we set up a meeting with him in person, a Zoom meeting with him. And we prepared, we had the rabbi there. We had a Muslim organization there. We had Black clergy that are not Catholic. We had representing the diocese, it was Father Manny from Our Lady of Hope. And we prepared people from Haiti as well, were there with us. And we asked the congressman what is being done. We advocated for changes that we learned about from both the diocese and from some of the national organizations. There are things that can be done. And we learned what they are. We could get the U.S. Agency of International Development to provide relief to those Haitians who are now in Haiti, who have been deported, so that there's resources for them that the Haitian government does not have. We also can advocate for those who are still at the border, that their right of asylum, which is an international right. We talked about rights. There is an international right. If you have been displaced from your country, you have a right to request asylum, no matter what country in the world you arrive to. That right was taken away by the Trump administration during COVID with the rationale that these immigrants represent a health threat to the United States. And we advocated with our congressman that right be restored, the right to petition for asylum, because the Biden administration continues to enforce the Trump rule that these people can be deported without the right to request asylum. So it's the same kind of way I've been talking about. We start at the very closest, smallest thing to ourselves. One is inform ourselves about the issue as best we can. Look for a diversity of sources. Fox News would report one thing, CNN and MSNBC would report another thing. We need to look at at a diversity of news sources and find out what do we trust, what is informative. We can do that at home individually. I talk with my wife, who's an immigrant and who works with immigrant communities, and asked her what she thought we could do. I reached out to Father Manny, who's a close friend and a pastor here, and asked him. I reached out to a friend at the diocese who works with the Inland Coalition for Immigrant Justice. We reached out to other people, including Haitian people that we know in the region, and asked them what they thought we could do. And we took action. So we went through that process of speaking and learning, reflecting, and then taking action. And did we solve the problem? No. Oftentimes, these big problems, they have to be broken down into little parts so that you can solve a part of it. And we think we did solve a part of it, because Congressman Aguilar told us that there is more that the AID, the US government, can do, and they're working on that. And he will be present advocating for more services both in Haiti and here at the border. That's, so the basic tenets of speak, listen, reflect, and take action guided us, as well as the principle of subsidiarity, where you start to the closest to yourself and move up to try to learn more about how to address the root causes, see what we can do locally, and then move up the chain. And obviously there's so much more that needs to be done. And there's still well over 1,000 Haitians at our southern border. And just today, another group of migrants crossed over into the southern border of Mexico. This is an issue that is constantly impacting us and will be during the COVID pandemic, because in some ways we've addressed that pandemic as a country at the cost of other countries whose 99% of their people have no vaccines. They will continue to seek refuge, and they are, by definition, the poor and the vulnerable. Vulnerability now is, we've learned about it from our own experience with COVID-19, that those who are most vulnerable to death and sickness of COVID-19 are the poorest among us, the elderly, those who have fewer resources. COVID-19 impacts right here in one of the richest nations in the world. It impacts immigrant communities more. It impacts Black families more. If you look at the percentage of people who have been sick and have passed away. So that, by definition, is the poor and the vulnerable. And we need to continue to look at it through that framework that we're taught through in Catholic social teaching, is we do have an option, a preferential option, to identify how the poor, the most poor and the most vulnerable are impacted, and to reach out both through social services and charity, and also seeking justice in our actions as a church. Does anybody else, this is, really also in some ways a controversial issue. Should it be controversial to help those who arrive at our border seeking refuge? For some reason it is, but I know there's a diversity of opinions about it. Is there anybody else want to talk about this principle of the preferential option for the poor and the vulnerable before we move to the next?
Let me just say,
Well, go ahead, Paul, go ahead.
let me just say one thing that I heard not too long ago is that of the initial wave of Haitian immigrants that came to the border and were confronted by our immigration officers and system, that there is to be, from what I understand, another wave. This is not going to end. And as I understand it, they're on their way, they're traveling now through Central America on their way to the US border again. So this is by no way over. And, if we could somehow be more proactive rather than reactive, I think it's something that we need to educate ourselves about and see whether or not we can come up with solutions to avoid the catastrophe. Because as far as I'm concerned, this was one of the worst catastrophes at the borders in recent years. Not to say that we haven't had many, we have had tons of catastrophes, including the separation of families, children from their parents, and those parents are still orphaned in our country. And our government is trying to find those parents, but that's another catastrophe that's happened. But this is going to happen again, and we should be proactive, not reactive.
Okay. This country is always going to be in denial from the very start of its inception. So this conversation is going to continue on. The racial biases in this country is going to continue on, because even with the Cubans, when they come across it, they get turned around. So it's obvious people of color get the short end of the stick. Not to say the Hispanics that come across the border don't get the short end of the stick, but it's a knee-jerk reaction when those of darker complexion try to seek asylum in the United States. And what happened to this effort of the international sending vaccine? Because we hear this talk, they're making vaccines for other countries, but all I'm hearing is India is getting a bulk of this. What about the Central Americas? I mean, I don't hear no effort to vaccinate those who are at the border. So it's a mildred of different things that's going on. And I don't think there's going to be a resolution to it. We could bite off a little piece here, a little bit there, but it's not going away because this is ingrained in our culture. It's ingrained in individuals. And now that certain people have let down the curtain so everybody can act any way they want to, say what they want to anytime, it's like, it's a free fall. So it's incumbent on us as Christians, particularly as Catholics, to hold the line as doing the right thing morally and all those other things. But it's overwhelming for any one individual, if you look at it, like you had mentioned before, to even address this. So it's a one-on-one, a group thing, but I don't think it's going to go away because it starts from the conception of this country, even the world, we could say that. But from this point, I know this country is set on divide, rich and the poor, people of color, people not of color. So it's always going to be like that. It's not going to change much until Jesus comes. But we could certainly keep working on it. That's the journey. We could keep working on it and make things better between each other, between our families, between the communities, between the states, if that could be. But even we see the separation in the states now. They're separating people, and people are going to certain places because those people are not there, or my viewpoint, political or otherwise, is more here. That's where I want to be. So it's a human thing, and it's a sinful stain that it can't be washed out until Jesus gets here.
Thank you, Carl. I couldn't agree more. The original sin of the United States is slavery, and it continues to be deeply embedded in all of our institutions. Anti-Black racism is a part of who we are. And as a white man in this country and a Catholic who has gone through this process of trying to learn about the teachings of Christ and the teachings of our church, especially those around social justice, I've had to try to change and learn about my own ingrained biases and the institutions that support those, the educational institutions that I've attended, et cetera. It is a lifelong process to become more Christ-like. But it's a beautiful process. We can do that. We can grow and change and reach our hand out to other people and be enriched by that process. So I don't look towards the final coming as the only way to exercise my Catholicism in this broken world and unjust world, but I look to do that on a daily basis in the little ways that I can. And I think we make progress. We can make progress. I think I've changed a little bit, and I see my community has as well. And I think that's what we're called on by Christ to do when we are called to love those who are the least of us, the least among us. It's the call to those who are made the least of us because systems have oppressed them historically. And we've internalized that, and now we think that those people are less than, when really they've been made less than. Their humanity and their dignity have been taken away. But we can find that and renew that. And it makes us more dignified people if we do that.
Yeah, and it's that's a good point, Tom, but it's not that burden, not yours, even within the minorities themselves. And they know we stratify ourselves in different classes. Every one of them do. So we're our own worst enemy in a lot of cases, but the bigger picture is this stain that we just can't get rid of. And until we're able to look at each other, like Rich said, his family is multi-diverse and they come together. Multi. And a lot of our families are like that. But it's just so few of us against this wave of hate and sinfulness. You know, it's discouraging. It's keeping people from, a lot of people won't react or address it because it's just overwhelming to them. And the few of us that do, you get worn out from it. So it's just a journey.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Anybody else on this principle of a preferential option for the poor and the vulnerable? Anthony and then Dan.
Just really quick. You know, I don't know, I don't deal with it close enough, but you know, I know people who have tried to immigrate to this country in a legal way and illegally. And the problem is that we as a country do not have a good immigration plan. There isn't any kind of coherent, consistent process, functioning process of letting people immigrate into this country and addressing those concerns. You know, it becomes an issue of politics and money, and until we as a country, I mean, we can do what we can locally as Catholics. We have people in front of us that we have to minister to, and we should do the best that we can to any person that comes in front of us. And that's what we're expected to do, at least I think, for me individually, to try to take care of someone as best we can. But this has to be something that's done on a higher level in a more consistent and thoughtful way. And it hasn't, and it needs to be addressed in these areas, you know. And there's so many, and it has to reach out to the countries around us too, to help them and to assist them. So it's a very complicated problem, and but we need a government who has the willpower and has and us as citizens to put our voice behind it and say this is a priority for us, and this is something that's important for us to address.
Thank you. Dan had raised a hand there.
Okay. You know, from the scenario, the Haitian were fleeing poverty, and it shows to us that the issue of poverty is universal. So it's not only found in Haiti; it's found all over the world, and the tendency to move to a industrial country which is rich is common sense. It's an issue of survival. But the question is, how do we actively and effectively accompany people out of poverty and oppression? And we can only look at our Christian life, which mandates solidarity with the poor through social and political action. Meaning, if we are to dismantle, we have to effect change in our society. If we want to cater and work for the preferential option for the poor, then we have to look at the social and political structures that are perpetuating this oppressive and poor condition of the people. And this requires conversion of both the people and the institutions that created them. The theology of accompaniment, I think, is required from us in order to understand the situation of the people, because without knowledge of their needs and their aspiration, we cannot help them. We cannot help them. It is said that walking with another is always a fundamentally religious sacramental act. So I guess walking with them is required from us in order to help them. Thank you.
Thank you. I know Fernando wants to share.
Yeah, just real quick, I'll start off by me when I was a toddler till now that I'm 56 years old. It'll be just a little while. No, just kidding. No, really brief. You know, all these policies and all these organizations, and we talk about governments. These are all things that are ruled by people. And who are these people? Well, there are sons, there are daughters, there are grandkids eventually. So there is that little grain right there sitting that in latency or just waiting for it to be developed. I think Don kind of alluded to that too in what he's had to say, but you know, it's part of us. We do have a say, because if we educate our children and our grandkids, and we affirm our faith, because a lot of these policies are just hypocrisy, really, because you know, we call ourselves a Christian nation, for example, here in the States, yet our policies and what we do are totally contradictory to what they stand for. We've been fortunate enough to be at other countries and seen they are not Christian countries, but they act as they were. They do have policies, and I've talked to no end about Sweden because that's that my son is from moved there, and we're a little bit more familiar with things over there. But what I'm trying to get at is this whole organization and the decision makers are people, and those people come from our families. And if we can somehow educate our own families and start there, and the sum of all this eventually, hopefully, won't take the second coming of Christ. But I don't know. I just want to say that.
Thank you. It takes us back to the thinking about the family. The family is the core of Catholic social teaching, is at the core of dignity and the Catholic social teaching. And if we can't do this in our own home, if we can't teach our own children to respect the poor and the vulnerable, then how can we be successful outside?
Can I say something, Tom?
Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, when you say family, I'm an immigrant and I'm a Filipino. So when somebody says family, it's not just the nuclear family. Filipinos have a very large extended family. So cousins, first, second, and even third generations are part of family. And I know among other Hispanic Latino groups, we share the same history and culture. So when somebody says call to family, it's more call to community also. So there's a blurring with, my neighborhood is my family, not just my immediate family. So when integrating that with the option for the poor and vulnerable, I get that to mean that, whatever sense of morality we have to address all these issues, which sometimes illustrates itself in the political arena. We as Catholics, when we enter into those issues, we enter it as a result of what we consider to be right or wrong. And the option for the poor, I always take it as to nurture that sense of right and wrong. We should always look or always be closely linked with the poor and vulnerable in our community. That is the one that anchors our sense of morality, not our own personal sense of morality, because we see that all the time here in America. Different groups have a different sense of morality. So, this theme of Catholic social teaching for me is very important because that anchors our sense of morality.
Thank you, Bob. That's very, very true here. In the United States, we often think that we just have to take care of our kids. And if we do that, everything will be all right. And that's been happening for hundreds of years, and everything isn't all right. We do need to think of the community as our broader families. Thank you. Let's move on to the next one. Let's see. The dignity of work and the rights of workers. The economy must serve people, not the other way around. Work is more than a way to make a living. It is a form of continuing participation in God's creation. If the dignity of work is to be protected, then the basic rights of workers must be respected. The right to productive work, to decent and fair wages, to the organization and joining of unions, to private property, and to economic initiative. So exercise here is while talking with a custodian at your church, you learn that she is not being granted the same medical benefits that are typically given to employees in her position. She is afraid to speak up to her supervisor in fear of potentially being fired. What are some of the following options best reflect the previous theme of the dignity of work and the right of workers? Report the discrepancy with the expectation you'll somehow be compensated. Advise the woman to do less work until she is granted her benefits. Ignore the discrepancy since you are unaffected by her situation. Or finally, report the discrepancy. Again, I think this is pretty evident that, if it were a test, what the correct answer is. But the point of this is for us to discuss a little bit about this very important component of Catholic social teaching, the dignity of work and the right of workers. So in a situation close to home, like your own church or your family, your neighborhood, your own workplace, when you see the discrimination or the taking away of people's rights as workers, what is our response? In this particular case, what do you think our response would be? And I think this is so evident, we don't really need to take a couple minutes reflecting on it. Would anybody care to speak about this particular scenario, or more generally, how in your life, in your family, and your community, you experience the taking away dignity of work and of workers, and how we can respond as Catholics?
Hey, Tom, I just have a quick comment that I wanted to share. I know a man who has worked for the same organization for over 20 years, and he started out at minimum wage, and he does work almost full-time. And 20 years later, he makes more money than he did when he started, but he's still making minimum wage. That's not right. That is not right. And in this case, we have made supervisors and the leaders of the organization aware of it, and I think we're doing something to get him both higher wage and medical benefits. But these things happen. I honestly was unaware that someone could work for an organization for 20 years and still be making minimum wage.
Thank you, Rich. Yeah, would anybody else like to reflect on that or your own personal experience?
Well, Tom, here we go again. Where are you, Fernando? That's what we're trying to establish where I work at, and that's a union. But the company is one of the big giants per se, and it seems like it doesn't matter what you do. They try to manipulate a situation. They try to pay you off. Then they try to coerce the employees, the new ones especially, because they always have a turnaround, and they have their ways of knocking the union out, and they will fight it. But at the same time, they say that they're there for your safety. They're there for your whatever. But what they did this past month or two is that they knocked off the staggered shift. We're still in COVID. We still have COVID cases coming out of the warehouse every day, not by one person, but by multiple persons. And now starting actually today, they want to pull 11-hour shifts. And now we're intertwined with the two staggered shifts that are left. And when you bring it to their attention, the first thing that comes out of their mouth, even HR, is business needs. And how do you break through something like that when, like it says, everyone's scared? Everyone's scared because they're afraid they're going to get fired. They're afraid they're going to get knocked out, even though it's their right to be able to organize or be able to speak up, which they got hit by the Labor Relations Board because of Alabama situation down there, that they have to more or less leave the employees alone when they do it. But they also have their way of circumventing that for their own interest, and of, per se, where I get the cowboy part is that's that culture that's there. So you can fight and fight and fight, but there's always going to be sometimes pushback. So you have 3-4 major companies. You got Amazon, you got Walmart, you probably got, I don't know who else, but I know these are the 2 big major leaders. And there's resisting there. And so, and to gain anything ahead, it's like a constant battle, or it's been.
Yeah, this issue is apparent all over our region and our country. People who spend their whole life earning minimum wage, people whose right to organize for a just pay and benefits are met with incredible resistance. Over the last 40 years, unionization within the United States has gone from over 40% of our workforce that was unionized to presently around 10%. And we're called to act as people of faith and as Catholics. So others, what do you say? I see Dan's hand up.
Yeah. Okay. My option here would be to report the discrepancy. The reason is, if you allow this to continue, then the working environment becomes hostile, and you will be, full of frustrations, and even a lot of desolation, because you are not getting the right treatment. And this situation applies not only to being deprived of medical benefits. It can also be a case of a situation where you are being sexually harassed and you just keep quiet, which is not beneficial, and which would only elevate or escalate the situation in the future. So you don't have to report this to your supervisor. You can, for example, for sexual harassment, there are state and federal agencies which you can report directly about your situations. In my personal case, we have age discrimination in the company that I work in, and I was discriminated for promotion because of my age. And so if I just kept quiet, the situation will continue, and it would affect me seriously, because I see that the working environment is not conducive to my being a productive worker. So I brought a case against them, and I won. My point is, you have to report the unfair treatment or iniquitous condition, because you are doing others a favor by stopping this treatment and inflicting them in the future to other people. So report.
Thank you. Bob?
Yes, the option I would take would be option E. It's not here, but that option E would say, call Tom Dolan from the ICUC because they've had experiences dealing with this. You know, in other words, I would need some help because if a custodian at the church has that kind of issue, most likely there are other workers in the same church or company that will have that issue. So in that case, you know, a resolution that will have to be put in place is not something that should just address the immediate individual issue, but something that will, you know, constitute a more of a structural change within that company. So therefore, that probably would mean organizing a union, but at the same time nowadays, you need to organize also the community side by side with organizing the union. And I know that it's very hard to be in conflict with the powerful, but we do have experiences like what happened to the Harvard group of custodial workers who after 2 years were able to get their demands realized. And think of that, Harvard University, one of the very powerful entities in our country, and yet was able to be to give way to that dedicated group of organizers within their, I guess, the custodial department. So there is strength in numbers, but you have to organize it comprehensively, and people like Tom Dolan and his group would have the expertise and the know-how to do that. So I would make sure that I know in my community who those groups are.
Tom, can I say something? So some of these issues are really complicated. This specific one isn't. This specific one is a human being who is suffering in fear that she's going to lose her job if she speaks up. And I don't think she needs to be afraid of that. And what she needs is someone to hold her hand and go help her with the situation. So I would be willing to help this employee go and speak to the supervisor and help there be a dialogue between them to understand what's going on. It doesn't make sense that there's other employees doing the same work that get the benefits and she doesn't. You would think there must be some distinction. I don't know what it is. She doesn't know what it is either. But let's find out. So I'm happy to go with this woman to help her to have a conversation with her supervisor to find out what's going on. And if there's something that needs to be done to get her the insurance, well, what is that thing? And help her to accomplish it. And that's it. Just help this person with her situation. Because that's it for me anyway, that's it.
Thank you. We see these issues all around us. Anybody else have experience in this area? I think the rule that I've been trying to share with people is talk with others, listen, do reflection, research, look out, reach out to people who are more knowledgeable, look to other organizations, listen, speak, do research, and then take action. That's the central kind of teaching of Catholic social teaching, what we do. It's all around us, and we can make a difference. We really can. Let's move to the next one.
Tom, your mic is on.
Thank you for being in solidarity with me. Yeah, solidarity also is one of those words that sounds complicated, but can really be broken down in something quite simple that we all experience as human beings. So we're all one human family, whatever our national, racial, ethnic, economic, and ideological differences may be. But we're like one of those dysfunctional families, right? And loving our neighbor has global dimensions and requires us to eradicate racism and address the extreme poverty and disease plaguing so much of the world. Solidarity also includes the scriptural call to welcome the stranger among us, including immigrants seeking work, a safe home, education for their children, and a decent life for their families. It seems very simple and clear. Solidarity. Love your neighbor as yourself. Let's look at an example. After a man is choked to death by police, protests and demonstrations demanding that the officers be charged and tried in court break out across the country. Please select and discuss what you think should be our response, an appropriate course of action as Catholics and as a community. 1, change the news station you watch and let other people work this out. Honestly, I think that's happened a lot. 2, follow the story and see what happens. 3, find out where there is a march and join it. 4, pray that this situation be resolved fairly. You all know what I'm talking about. There's a name, George Floyd. There's many names. It's happening every day. How can we act in solidarity? What does solidarity mean in this context? Would someone like to share their experience or their thinking?
I'll start.
Yes, please.
Yeah. The police officer in question, for me, is not just an individual. In that case, he represents a school of thoughts, a particular way, a group of persons are thinking within the country. Good. We can persecute that police officer, punish him, but that does not really solve the problem. So for me, in this case, we need to go back to the roots. This police officer is coming from a family. This police officer is coming from a community. This police officer is coming from a particular group. I mean, a particular group that people think alike. That we need to start handling these issues from those cells, because it does not just end, I mean, by handling it at the level of that police officer. We'll punish him, send him to jail. Tomorrow, another one will spring up somewhere. the next day, another one will spring up somewhere. And if you see, those things are unending because we just handle the cases involved, but we don't handle the issue at large. For example, my kids, they go to a Catholic school. When they come back home, they used to share with me some of the things that their classmates are sharing in class with them. It's very, very shocking. Very, very shocking to hear kids having those kinds of way of thinking. So we need to start this somewhere. And also, like the Catholic social teachings, as we are all discussing here, for me, the best way to get this information out to the society is not to call those people there in Washington, to call, because those people there, they represent, they will always listen back to the communities. If their community wants them to do a particular thing, that is what they'll tend to listen to, because they'll be afraid that they'll be voted out of those offices. One way that I was thinking a lot, I was just thinking to myself, we have all parishes. Parishes don't have schools. Most of them don't have schools. Most of our parishioners, I live, like, for example, in Moreno Valley, and there is no school around here for me to send my kids to. I have to drive my kids right to Riverside, the Catholic school. Why can't the church not make it in such a way that each parish have schools? Because it is only through schools that we can teach our society what we want. I mean, we can easily pass this kind of information to our kids that are growing up. And the few schools that are existing are for the rich. There is no poor family that can afford to send a kid to a Catholic school. And what is the essence of the Catholic school? And one other reason too is that I came to understand is like each school, although they have maybe their own curriculum, they operate in their own way. There should be a universal way when it comes to religious education, to moral teachings, because that is the reason why some of us parents send our kids to Catholic schools. So for me, the best way to pass out all these informations is to make sure we open so many Catholic schools, make almost all the parents that wants their kids to acquire these Catholic educations, send their kids to Catholic school, make it a little bit affordable. That is just my own idea.
Thank you. Does anybody else have something to speak on this experience or an idea of how we can express solidarity and act in a way that is in solidarity around this issue?
Could I say one thing really quick?
Anthony, yes, please.
Well, I must say that I was a little I'm a little encouraged by our young people and how they responded to this, what happened, and how they united to show their support and solidarity for rights, for human rights, for people, for the right, for morality, and they, it was very hopeful to see that, you know, and I think if we continue in that direction with the younger people, you know, hopefully there's a day where no one sees each other in a different way. That that racism is not something that's inherited from one generation to the next or taught, because young people are taught racism, as Daba was alluding to, in terms of education. They're taught certain things, the ways to think, and it carries on through the generations. And it was nice to see that there were young people of all kinds of cultures and backgrounds that were coming together to voice their opinions and to support a movement.
Thank you. So do we join the march? Do we let youth join the march?
Yes,
I
yes,
just,
we join the march.
Tom, I just wanted to add something if I may.
Yes, please.
You know, the voices are not only within us, but I have a good friend that he's LAPD, and he voices the opposition to this type of attitude toward the attitudes that we've seen. And he is a voice inside. He's one of very few voices, but there are voices within the police departments that defend the rights and the dignity of people. So there are those people in there. It could be a slow process. And on the other hand, I have good friends that voice their opinion differently. So with us being part of this as marching, and I would do that, we would do that. There's just hope. There's hope inside. There's hope within those institutions that people are against this type of attitude. And my good friend is one of them, and I'm really proud of him because he stands up to these guys, and there are many. There are many against that one.
Thank you. Anyone else? How do we express solidarity? What does solidarity look like in this scenario that's going on around us all the time?
Tom, can I say
Yes.
something?
Yes, Cap.
When I saw this scenario and the solidarity box was the one highlighted, I know in the back of your mind, it was this issue of George Floyd, but also in the context of solidarity, I also put the scenario in other countries, South American or Asian countries. And the dynamics is very different. In other countries, the police are just extensions of local politicians. They've been quite, politicized. And this incident or this scenario is one of so many that has already been happening in the past. So in some other countries, their option is, forget the march. Let's just go to the hills. And they have a more what do you call armed response to this oppressive system. And from us here, who will probably hear of these options that they've taken, I guess in solidarity, I guess one option would be is to to try to understand the context of those solutions that they have proposed in those other countries, and not just completely say that's not good or that's immoral or the option. But in our context, finding out where that march is just one of so many options. I mean, if I learned anything from the civil rights movement of past, you join marches, you file cases of suit, and you institute new legislation. You know, there's more than one option to end this kind of institutional inequity that's been showing itself in terms of this incident about a man being choked to death by police. So this is just one of many illustrations of a much deeper problem. So it has to be addressed in multiple arenas. So it's not just C, but I'll find out where there is a march and join it for one thing.
I totally agree, Bob. At the march, when we reach out our hand or we move our feet to be in solidarity, we can put ourselves in relationship with other people and learn what else is being done. And how can we be part of that as well? I think that one of the first things we need to do when we're faced with situations that require solidarity, of extreme injustice and racial prejudice or prejudice where we may not be the one who is being targeted. In my case, I'm infrequently the one who is being targeted. So for me, solidarity means much the same as what I've said before. I need to think it through. I need to speak with others. I need to inform myself. I need to find out who is leading the march. And it's not enough to show up and at the end of which I've done, at the end of the march with a sign. But I need to be courageous enough to introduce myself to people, knowing that they know that I'm not the one being targeted. And maybe the language with which I approach them shows that I'm ignorant or that I'm privileged. But I can swallow that pride or that fear, and I can reach my hand out and ask, what else can I do? And being in solidarity doesn't mean we put ourselves at the head of the march. It means we show up with what we have, we become vulnerable, and we learn from others. And sometimes we're leaders and sometimes we're followers. And that's what it takes is. So in the marches that were held here in San Bernardino, I was present. I took my children, not my littlest, but my 16-year-old daughter went with me. She wanted to. And we met many friends, because I've been doing this for a long time here, who know more about this. And we found out ways we could follow up. And we did, with the police department here locally, with our political leaders. We held an event at the county office with our county supervisors. And I was just in solidarity, but I stood and I wasn't at the podium speaking. I took people, and we called on the county to declare racism a public health crisis and to spell out what measures they will take to address this. And we've been following up and trying to turn that into something real that does impact these types of situations. Solidarity for me often means humility as well. I don't have to be the one leading the charge to play a role. I can follow and learn and continue to be active. So taking action is necessary for solidarity. Anyone else?
Agree. I agree with Bob and your comment because you know, our approach has to be in context. But when we do involve ourselves with this social action, we march with them, and we are able to do this. We do this because we would like to increase the pressure on decision makers to bring about changes on this particular issue. So it's just like lobbying, lobbying for change. But we join the affected community in solidarity with them because there is power in numbers. And not only that, we also follow our social concern or conscience to help those who are in need, especially those who are oppressed and marginalized.
Thank you. I guess we can move on to the next one. We are almost there. Okay, so the final one of these exercises and the final component or theme that's found throughout Catholic social teaching is care for God's creation. So it's not just something that happens on Earth Day. It's not just a slogan. It's not just something in the Bible. It's a requirement of our faith. We're called to protect people and the planet, living our faith in relationship with all of God's creation. The environmental challenge has fundamental moral and ethical dimensions that cannot be ignored. In our use of resources, we must be guided by our concern for the welfare of others, both around the world and for generations to come. So the scenario I'd like to present is the following. After the number of warehouses and trucks on the road has increased tenfold, and the number of days with unhealthy air quality continues to increase, residents of some inland cities have called for a moratorium on warehouse construction. Please select an appropriate course of action. 1, plan early for your Christmas shopping. 2, buy less stuff from Amazon. 3, hold a forum about pollution in warehouses at your church. 4, search the internet for Catholic responses to climate change.
Answer there. Don't make any joke.
So I just want to turn it over to people to think. We have only about 13 minutes left. I'd like to get everyone out of here by 2. I'm sure we will. As you told me where you're from, I wrote down the cities: San Bernardino, Riverside, Moreno Valley, Upland, Rancho, Temecula, Corona, Running Springs, Redlands,
Harupa Valley.
Harupa Valley.
Yeah.
Not a single one of these cities is not heavily impacted by this issue. And it does have to do with God's creation.
Yeah.
And I know some are impacted more than others, some are more worried than others. But how have you experienced this? And what do you think we can do as a community, and especially a Catholic community, to help address this issue?
You know, I live in the city and San Bernardino, and I see all the warehouses going up. But I understand that the warehouses are bringing jobs and opportunity for people to take care of their families. I think that, and I buy from Amazon as much as I can. I'm saving gas by not going out, my time. But I think that Amazon and some of these companies need to invest their profits into cleaner energy, their trucks, give an incentive to independent drivers so that they can have things that are cleaner to use, the truck industry to make things. I don't see taking income from people who maybe aren't educated enough and may need that employment to help them get more education. But Amazon and all these companies just putting money back in their pockets. And I don't see a whole lot that I can do that's going to bring about a quick change. I know there are a lot of trucks, and I work at the police department, and they just recently started a commercial traffic department because there are just so many trucks out here in San Bernardino, and they're parking in the residential because they need to get to the warehouse, but then there's no place for them to park. So I think there's a need, but I really think that these people that are making all this money need to reinvest back. And I don't think taking jobs away from people, just trying to support their families. Thank you.
Hi, Michelle.
Thank you.
I work, well, the Space Cowboy here. I work at Amazon in Moreno Valley. So that's where I'm saying a lot of the work issues there need to change, because the way they work their employees and treat them could be a lot better. Like I said, the business needs comes over anything, trumps anything, even with COVID, and doesn't care about the intertwining of employees. But I do have to say one thing: they do have a fleet of vans that are electric, and they're moving towards that more. Now their trucks are, some of them are, I don't know, with they call it Eco Safe or something, so I don't know where the diesel part is at. But yes, I have to agree with you that Amazon can afford to do more than what I see that they're doing, and that includes the way they treat their employees, and especially when there's a pandemic in the situation. Instead of having Bezos sit on TV looking at everybody taking, which I can see the ego and pride coming from, being praised for shooting himself up to suborbit and back. But yes, I had to throw that, and that's where Fernando comes off with the Space Cowboy, because it's but no, Amazon could do a lot better. But so outside of having buy less stuff at Amazon, which would quit breaking our backs, but we should be doing something, continue to do something within our church, which the church does, but at the same time regarding pollution. And Tom, we do have something that went on over here with in Jurupa Valley with the trucks, how many trucks are coming in, because a lot of them are coming through Jurupa Valley to get to Bloomington, which they're going to be building more warehouses up alongside the Locust area, if you're familiar with it, Locust Street. But whether or not I don't know where it's quite at, but yes, I think they've had to curb or did curb something for a while. Now they're working on gas stations, so I don't know where it's going to come into nothing's really clear, but anyhow, that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yes, I want to say something. The issue of pollution is is a complex one because it's also connected with other problems. Um, like, I mean, we're not just, the pollution doesn't just come from the warehouses and trucks, but it also comes from factories that pollute our waters, from refineries that pollute our air, from the very cars that we drive that contribute to what do you call this, the green air gases. So so the solution to pollution is, I guess it begins with C, holding a forum about pollution and warehouses, but having all the stakeholders come together and do dialogue and come up with a community or consensual decision on how to care for God's creation. Because if we lose our planet, I mean, it's gone. I mean, there's no one group that will benefit or not from the loss of our planet. So each of us has a stake in it, and we all have to like educate ourselves on what each of us can or should do to address this global problem. It's not just a national problem, it's a global problem.
Thank you. Anyone else? Tina?
Yes, hi. You know, when I'm looking at this problem, I don't really see pollution per se, but I'm seeing our reliance on material goods. I think that's the problem too, that, you know, at the slide of our finger, we could click and just get what we want. And, you know, it gets delivered the following day and we get addicted more because we like it. But, you know, as Catholic social teaching leaders, we should live simply and not really rely on this material goods to, you know, like the kingdom of God is, the values are reversed in such a way that we value more. Oh, okay, there's okay, spiritual poverty in the way it's good because there's dependence on God. But what I see in the world now is the poverty of spiritual poverty. So it's like, you know, this is not really a case of pollution. It stems from something deeper. And if we get to that source, then all of this problem, the pollution, will not even be a problem because we don't depend on, you know, the material goods so much. You know, we simplified our lives. When our lives are rightly ordered in God, and I think we don't need the material stuffs so much. That's
Thank
for
you.
me.
I want us to close up here. I know it's late. This issue of God's creation is something that the Catholic Church and our leaders are reflecting on more and more. It's not just what we see locally and in our region of trucks and warehouses. And there is a lot of pollution, but it's invisible. It's ozone. I have lived here for 25 years in San Bernardino. I don't smoke. I don't, you know, I have chronic bronchitis. I've had it for the last 5 years. And my doctor says it's probably from where I live. My children go to a school that was completely surrounded over the years by warehouses. Total, you could reach out your hand and touch a warehouse in the last one. Until this year, they tore down the school to turn it into a warehouse. There's many things we can do on all of these issues, as Catholics. They start with reflection and learning, reaching out to others, getting organized is a good thing. Holding events in our parishes to educate others. There's much we can do. And we also can address that poverty, that spiritual poverty. These are interconnected issues that when we get disconnected from each other and we don't reach out our hands to others, we don't live a life of solidarity and of questioning and organizing and taking action, our life does become more poor. Our spirit is injured. And so I'd like to close with something about this that I think is comes from our history in the United States. And it's something that was said by Frederick Douglass, who is one of the most important leaders in our history, who said, "If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Power concedes nothing without a demand." We need to learn how that we can struggle first with our own selves and our own spiritual weakness, our own sinfulness, our own ignorance and disconnectedness from others. And then how can we reach out in humility to others? Not that we know it all, and not to point fingers and blame others, but to learn from others. We do, as Catholics, we have so much that we need to learn together and that we can learn from each other. Solidarity needs to become a much more important part of our faith and our life as a Catholic community. If we do this in the name of Christ, in the name of the saints, and if we continue to learn from the teachings of our church, I know that you and your own ministry and in our parishes and our communal life, we will be better Catholics and better Christians, and we will be able to address many of these issues that affect us in the days that we live in. So I want to thank you for allowing me to take time with you and to share with you. And thank you for all you do in your parishes and in your community, in your families. And I encourage you to continue to grow in your formation process and in your participation in your congregations, in your churches, and in your community. I'm not sure if Jose Luis is on with us here. Can you hear us? I know you want to close us out, so I'll turn things over to you, Jose Luis.
Sure. First of all, Tom, thank you so much for making time in your busy calendar to be with us. I think we all appreciate it so much, and we wish you many blessings, particularly strength, and that your busy calendar can have spaces of free time for you so you can rest and also you can have time to enjoy life. Sunday is probably the only time you have to look for some rest. So thank you so much. You always have been available to support the diocesan programs, and this time was not the exception. So thank you. And I don't know if you can share your contact information, Tom, in case someone wants to reach you. You can send it through the chat. a number or email or something you want to share? You still here with us, Tom?
Yes, I am. I'm going to share my phone and my email right now.
Excellent. So thank you very much. And so, brothers and sisters, participants, it's time to conclude today's workshop on overview of the 7 themes of Catholic social teaching. We have our next session on November 14th, Sunday. We will also have 2 sessions, one in English and one in Spanish. And about today's session, I ask also Tom, if you can please send me the PowerPoint, and if you are willing to share the PowerPoint with the participants, Tom.
Yes, I'm not sure the best way to do that. I can email that to you? Or...
Yeah, email it to me tomorrow or later, and then I'll forward it to the participants.
I'm happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much. So I will forward to you the PowerPoint and any other notes that we have for this session. And as I explained after the first session, we will have a homework assignment for each of the remaining sessions. So see your emails from time to time, because we will send information about the assignment too. And if you didn't submit your previous assignment, work on it and let me know if you have any questions, because we are keeping record of those, and then we will decide on how to evaluate your active participation in the program, and active and responsible, of course, responsibly. So that's it. Let us close with short prayer, but before doing that, let me see if you have any questions or final thoughts.
You do have a question.
Yeah, Jose.
Okay. Tim, before you, I have. Go ahead with the question. Who was Bettina, or who was the one first? Okay, go ahead, Tim, and then other people. Tim?
Yes, Jose, I received a like a registration paper or something. We don't have to fill that out, right? Is that just for the ones that are on the outside of formation?
No, it is for everybody. It is for everybody, because remember that Charity and Justice is independent of the diaconate program.
Okay.
So we need to keep a record of all of you, name, parish, contact information, formation programs that you already took in the diocese, etc. And also we need, in an urgent manner, your postal address, so we can send you the books for the program.
Okay.
But yes, Xochitl send you the registration form. Please fill it out and send them back to her. The registration form and the assignments you complete, always send it to Xochitl. Don't send it to me, because I am very busy preparing the courses. Of course, we are in communication, and I will follow up with what you are doing and sending.
So Jose,
any other questions or comments?
Yeah, Jose, did you get my first assignment?
Yes.
I sent it to you. Okay.
Yes, those who were sent to me, I will forward it to Xochitl, but try to always send everything to Xochitl, because he's our assistant. Any other questions or comments or final thoughts?
Yes, Jose?
Yes, Bob.
Are we going to contribute something, not necessarily financially, but in terms of
the cost of the program?
No. Are we going to play a contribution to providing some feedback in preparation for the synod in our diocese?
That's a great idea. Great idea. Thank you. Thank you for your comment. Yeah, we are working with the Chancellor and Bishop Rojas, and I will see what kind of input can we provide. But Yes, I am also working with Rebecca Gifford. She's helping me to create an outline for the remaining assignments. So one aspect of the synod can be included in each of one. So yes, my expectation is that we contribute with something from the charity and justice participants to the synod process and the final document that the diocese will send to the Vatican. Thank you, Bob, for your comment. Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you. And for future sessions, I ask those who are deacon candidates to plan your formation days as best as possible, so you and your wife are fully present and fully active participating in the workshop. I think both are expected to be present the whole session. I know sometimes we are tired and we need to go to the restroom or do an emergency call or something. That's fine, but try to be present and have an active participation in the course, the full schedule. So let us close with a brief prayer in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. We praise you and we thank you, Lord, for this important session on the 7 themes of Catholic social teaching. We thank you for the time and gift of our presenter and instructor, Tom Dolan. We ask you to bless him and his family, bless him and his ministry and all his responsibilities, multiply his time and let him find joy in what he is doing on behalf of your people. Bless all our families, bless all our communities, and let us also find joy in these teachings and to be challenged and also be generous in the response we are trying to do to your invitation of making of ourselves, our families, and our communities instruments of salt and light. And in this Mission Sunday, we say a prayer for missionaries and that all of us live our baptismal call to be missionary disciples. For all this blessing, we say, glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning,
Is now and ever
now
shall
and will be forever.
and amen.
World with amen, amen. And may Mary intercede for us as well as Saint Joseph. And we go to our left time of this weekend with God's blessing in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, brothers and sisters. God bless you all and see you on November 14, God willing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.